Australia, Oceania, gematria, the things you said in that video, like there's a lot of interesting things to pull at there. You're going to be like a little bit shocked with a few of the things that I've come up with, because whether you know it or not, I think you touched into something that in a different angle than others have been touching into it. And then the some of your observations of synchronicity and Mandela effects of the last few week or so have been really interesting as well. So let's do that. And then in the second part, I want to talk about gematria in general, and whether this awareness about the gematria thing, like really suss this out. Is this helping us or is this hurting us? This gematria thing, because like it's one of these things that it's just an interesting conversation. So that's my plan. Let's get on the recording, and we'll just make nice once we get going. Do you want to record as well, Gary, or just want me to record?
I'm recording also. Gary. I'm just going to record the first half, and then the second half, if like my Patreon people want it, maybe you can just share the link with me and I'll put it on that way.
Yep.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, Dan. I like your car.
Yeah?
Nice whip.
Yeah, this is a Ferrari, bro. You don't even know.
I can tell. It looks good.
Okay, I give you record permissions, Gary.
I'm recording with a third party, so we're good.
All right, here we go. So, Daniel, there's background noise based on your cart. So just when you're not talking, mute your thing.
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay, cool. All right.
And it's good. That was a dirt track. I'm going to be on the road now, so it'll be quieter. Okay, but yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to mute it just to bring us in, and then when you're ready to talk, unmute yourself. I'm going to let you mute yourself, because if I mute you, then you'll have to ask me to unmute, and I don't want to do that. So just mute yourself.
All right, muting myself right now.
There we go. Cool. All right. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Recording in progress.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and my good friends Gary Warmerdam and Daniel Berdichevsky, who we like to call Birdie. We decided to kind of do, it wasn't really impromptu because we decided it earlier in the week, but this is just kind of like a one-off fun Sunday afternoon. This is sure as a shit show kind of roundtable chat about things we're noticing. So that's what's going on here. Gary, Daniel, welcome.
Thank you. Roundtable Sh Show. I think I can deal with that.
All right, thank you.
Birdie's coming to us from his golf cart at work, and Gary's in a different room than he usually is, and I'm sitting exactly where I always am, and we are ready to go. So, this kind of how is everybody, by the way? Haven't talked to Birdie was on the show just a few weeks back. We haven't talked to you in a little bit, Gary. How's everything going? I'm
good. I'm doing really good, actually. I mean, I don't know if you know, you probably know a little bit, but I've had like the most stability I've ever had in my entire life in like the last couple years since we've had this apartment. So in terms of my own little bubble, it's going better than it ever has. The world itself is, doing the shit show thing times like 10 or 15 or whatever. But like somebody else also made an interesting point. Maybe it was somebody that you had on. I don't remember. Probably. I mix everybody up in my head, but the point was that we, like the regular people, whatever, the alive people, are having more success during all this than before all this started happening, which is very strange, but that seems to be how it's going.
It's been exactly the same for me. And while I've always had a stable place to live, which is a little different than what your situation is, I myself have not been a stable person my whole life. Like I've always been stable in terms of like, there's only so far out of my tree I'm willing to go, so stable that way. But in terms of like the ability to, fully support myself, or the ability to follow through on the things that I say I'm going to do, or commit to something for any length of time without hopping around and changing my mind about things and whatnot. And my stability started before the lockdown or whatever, but like in terms of my ability to make things happen and to like have success in whatever this reality is, like it has also been the most during this period of time, which is interesting. And I hear the same from lots of our friends and people we know and people who struggled up to that point, right?
Yeah,
And suddenly something moved for them. So I don't know how it is for you, Birdie, but Birdie's got his like what's that group that used to wear their hats like that? It was like sort of a hip hoppy group, like after Bobby Brown or something. Like that, I don't know, Belle Biv DeVoe or something like that.
Well, I can't let people see my super top secret company, because I'll have enemies coming after me, So I gotta be really incognito.
There you go.
Yes, Birdie's coming to us live from behind enemy lines. So.
Wait, so Daniel, you're getting paid to do this show? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's right, you got it.
That's why he's actually being incognito. He doesn't want his boss to find out.
So, all right. So that's kind of where we're at with things. So things are, Birdie's at work and Gary's doing good.
Oh, one other thing on the Gary side. I got approved to take Fridays off from my regular work, which I'm going to be devoting to chess and coaching and doing things I actually care about. So it will feel more like I'm doing half the week work and half the week my own stuff, because the weekend will be almost as long as the week. So I'm quite happy about that.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the chess. I didn't know that you were a chess player.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that. And I certainly didn't know that you were a good enough chess player that you could coach others in playing chess.
Oh, yeah.
So I kind of, I've had always like some I've never played chess myself, but I've thought it was interesting. And I definitely, part of the reason I like tennis so much is because it's like moving chess. It like combines like athletics and chess in a way that is, that appeals to me. And of course I really liked that show Queen's Gambit that came out last year, and I could relate to that on a number of levels. Mm-hmm. But Michael and I and some of our Project Kids and Glass Beat Game stuff has been starting to peek a little bit into Enochian chess. You familiar with that at all?
Nope, never heard of it.
So apparently this is like some secret other kind of chess that like maybe this is part of the Masonic lore, and certainly part of like maybe some of the like programming skills that go along with mind control stuff, or certain sort of ritual initiation kinds of things. So I was just curious if you'd heard of it, and I didn't even know you played.
I've never heard of that.
Enochian chess?
Enochian chess, like the Book of Enoch or something like that, right?
Okay. I've heard of Go, which is like I've heard of Go. That's a chess derivative, or else chess came from it. I don't know which came first. Go is more complicated, but that's the only like chess related thing aside from all of the variants of chess that do exist. But never heard of Enochian chess. It's interesting.
Yeah.
What is it exactly? Does it involve the same sort of structure at all and just different rules?
So I think it's similar structure, different rules. Maybe there's moves made off the board, right? Like I don't know that it's confined to the board in the same way that regular chess is, and I'm not sure that it's like designed to be sat at a table and played. That this is more something that one plays in the larger reality. I'm not sure though. Like it's just started to pop up into a few things based on some other information that we're just dipping our toe into. So anyway, I was just curious if you'd ever heard of it. But
yeah, no, that's really interesting.
I would have thought.
Oh wow, I've been playing for a long time.
Yeah.
And if that's what the Enochian chessboard looks like, apparently.
Yeah. See how it goes off the board?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, I've been playing chess. I think I got introduced to it when I was like 15, and I was not great at it. My dad taught me the basic moves, and I played with him. He'd beat me all the time, and I didn't like it, but I didn't really know how to do anything different because my only instruction came from him, and he was the one that was beating me, so he probably was withholding somewhat, or I'm assuming. And eventually, I discovered the internet, and discovered that I could play chess on the internet, and then I got like hooked on that style of playing because you're connecting with another person. Maybe you're not necessarily talking with them, and 90% of them now feel like NPCs because they don't ever say anything, but theoretically you're connecting with the person, and you get to learn. And that's how I learned the game. I have a professional coach now, like a higher one for a lot of money. But before I didn't used to do that. I used to just teach myself, and I got myself to the level I'm at right now, which compared to the whole rest of the chess world is 99.7 to 99.9th percentile compared to the whole rest of the chess world. But if you look at like the gradient of I don't know how to describe it. Like the rating system goes from 500 to like 2,800 to 3,000 maybe. I'm like 23, 24. So that means 0.2% of the top is from 2,400 to 3,000, and then 99.8 is from 2,400 down. It's not exactly like mathematically proportional. It's kind of weird. It just means the stratosphere is really rarefied as you get up top. It's sparsely populated. Is what I'm saying. So then now I'm just adding in theoretical study. So all my stuff was self-taught. It's like learning how to box out in the alley and getting really good that way, and then going and hiring a professional teacher at the very end of it. That's what I'm doing.
Very cool. So you've had a coach. Do you compete? Have you played
in
any?
Yeah. I just played in Vegas just like a month ago.
Oh wow! I knew you went to Vegas. I saw. I follow your community posts on YouTube and whatnot, but I didn't realize that you were there playing in a chess tournament. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Do you play chess, Daniel?
Yes, I do. Not as often as I used to. But I do play with my son sometimes. But when I was a kid, I used to play it quite a lot, as well as a bunch of card games, like a lot of Russian card games, like the 52 deck cards. We spent a lot of time playing cards.
I play some cards, and for me, the games were always more like crossword puzzles and Sudoku and stuff like that. Like I'm unusually good at Sudoku, right? Like I actually have to not let myself play it, because if I play it for an extensive period of time, it invades my dreams. Does chess ever invade your dreams?
It used to.
Yeah.
I used to be trying to sleep, and I would see board after board after board of different positions just flashing in front of my mind, and I couldn't sleep. It was terrible.
Yeah. So my mind would be trying to solve Sudoku things while I'm like thinking I'm sleeping, and then it would turn into like this sort of like 3D athletic kind of Sudoku, where there'd be like a physical maneuver involved with like number in this, right? It turned into something completely else. Like it combined Sudoku, like mathematics, capoeira, and dancing, and that I was not getting much rest, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I've had things like that, whether it be like on some substance or whether it be just in dreams or hyperspace imagination. I don't know. I know what you're talking about, though. I know like what our minds can do when you take something that you already have a skill set developed in, and then you combine it with some sort of physical movements, and you can get trapped in certain areas, and it can be bad for sure, but it also can be interesting.
It can be both. It can be interesting. It being good. It can allow you to advance to a higher level than without that, right? Because sometimes like thinking of something one way, you bump up against the wall, but then when you move something that's mostly mental into the physical world, it develops some dimensions that help you see it a different way, and then you can solve it. But once you start developing the skill to be able to do that, your mind doesn't really want to stop doing that. And so it's doing that shit with everything all the time, and that's exhausting itself. So you
become a tangential thinker, like everything just connects to everything else. And then if you talk to someone who doesn't know what that's about, they're like, what the fuck is she talking about? We're talking about cars, and all of a sudden we're off to talking about the moon, and they're both related in your mind, but with someone who you're talking to that doesn't know how to think like that, they're just going to think you're insane.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, so you had a video last week, and I'll put that in the description box for people to go look at, where it was just like this interesting combination of things, and it was basically the trucker convoy, Oceania 1984, gematria, and then you were also talking about sort of like playing the wordplay around Australia and AI, astral, like all of this kind of stuff, right? But there was a lot of stuff in that video, and let's start maybe like with the truckers convoy, and then we can move into some of the sort of the stuff about Oceania or Australia. Of course, we're a few days on. Bertie, can you mute? It's a little noisy.
I'm sorry. I'm not moving. That's why I unmuted. Okay.
Okay. There we go. We're a few days on farther from that, and there's, more activity going on. But I think what you were saying, I've had this conversation a little bit with Lindsay Sharman in a show we just recorded. It's not out yet, about this. Like, we have become way too just like predictable and comfortable with the way we'll just declare everything a psyop and never do anything and whatnot.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I personally, and I know that you probably and Bertie and a lot of our listeners, like, we're not much for things like protests and movements and whatever, but it's turned into this sort of like polarity thing, right? Where like, it's like everybody's lost any nuance for like, how to not only view these things, but in terms of like how you want to position yourself related to them. So take it away, because you kind of had some stuff to say about that, and then we will talk about it a bit.
To preface, before I talk about any of that, I want to mention that for me personally, it has gone, whatever it is that you do when you declare something a psyop, or you think, oh, maybe, but the people are moving, that sort of internal back and forth, I took that sort of thing and I literally put it into every single human being that I interact with, and it's always about manipulation. There's an energetic signature that you internally feel when you're lying or trying to manipulate somebody, and I can feel that in you as the person I'm talking to, and if I feel that, I won't interact with you. So that's what I'm saying. The trucker thing, it's a similar thing. That's a group situation, but it's a similar sort of metric that you can judge by. And I do it with individuals, which means I don't join any groups. I don't join any movements. And if I allow groups, it's like chess stuff, and that's all we talk about is chess. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about, what the Pope is doing or anything like that. That's what I'm saying, is it's a really guarded way. It's a really guarded way of being, and it's sort of evidence of what sort of psychotronic warfare this place has gone through, that I have felt the need to do that in the first place with personal relationships. It's kind of ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But I do it every single time. Every single time that somebody comes and talks to me, if I feel any manipulation whatsoever, they won't even know what happened. They'll just be like, oh, Gary's not talking to me anymore. And that will be it. But anyway, the trucker convoy, it's big. So that's the first indicator that something's up, is that it's big. I mean, like, big stuff is always tampered with. It's tampered with at the very minimum by AI algorithms because it's so big. And what I was saying about do you ever get that thoughts just disappear out of your head?
Yes, more in the last year. In that period of time that things have been going well for me while the rest of the world falls to shit, I also have had that happen more often than it ever used to happen before.
Yeah, it'll come back. Trucker convoy.
So we were saying that it was big, and so just by its size, it's able to be screwed with. No matter what, it's able to be screwed with algorithmically, at least in the way it's presented, that kind of thing. I'm not sure where you were sort of headed with that.
I said AI, yeah. I don't remember at all. Maybe you can. Maybe.
Psychotronic weaponry right there.
Yeah, see, someone's trying to edit my thought space already.
Okay, but, so this is like so let's. I'll hop in here for a second, and it'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Talking. So I mean, totally right. Like I've never been really too much one for like protests or movements or joining groups or whatever. Again, like if I have been part of groups, it's like you said, like around a particular activity. Like I go to warehouse parties, or I like whatever it is, right? But it's never been in this sort of movement kind of way. And at a certain point, I lived in downtown Los Angeles during Occupy Wall Street, and LA was one of the first cities to pop up a pretty big protest as soon as it started in New York. And it was just down the street from my apartment. And so like I walked down there one day, and I kind of walked around to, just kind of check out what was going on. And it was like, something about this, kind of, like this doesn't feel like anything actually meaningful. It feels like a lot of people just like sitting around at the park talking about and doing the same things that I hear people sitting around talking about doing at like music festivals and shit like that. Like it doesn't really feel much different, you know. And it was back in like 2011 or 2012 or whatever it is. I know so much more now than I did then. But you know, it was really close to my apartment, so I would hear them out there chanting and doing stuff and whatnot, and you know, and then it kind of disappeared and dissipated. But that was like one of the first times that we really got a clear picture on how like these movements are like. I mean, we know it's been happening all along, but we were able to track it really well in real time, the way it was being sort of engineered from the front and from the back, and sort of infiltrated and poked around with. And that doesn't mean that there was no elements of it that were not, you know, there were obviously some organic people there and some people who were well-meaning. But the fact of the matter is, like Adbusters magazine in Canada, very well known for being left-wing agitator kind of stuff, put out the call for everybody to gather in Zuccotti Park. So it wouldn't have happened if that stone hadn't been thrown. But that was the last time that there was like kind of a protest movement on this level that wasn't like a Black Lives Matter kind of thing, right? Or like an Antifa kind of thing where it's like a different sort of protest, right? And so, you know, like my first thoughts were like, okay, we all have it. This is totally controlled and whatnot. But then you kind of look at it, and there's some different things going on with this one than with some of the other stuff, to the point where it's like, is it? I mean, like, what's, you know, this is a harder one to assess. There's something about this one that feels a little different than the other ones. And that doesn't mean like, oh, let's all get out and go rah, rah and join. There is something different. And I'm not sure I know exactly what it is. I have a few kinds of ideas here or whatnot, but I'm hearing a lot of people say the same thing that you're saying, that I'm saying, that in the past have maybe said, and none of that stuff for me, it's all controlled opposition or whatever. I hear people saying, well, wait a second, let's not be so quick to judge this one. Something is going on. What it is, I don't know. But
yeah, well, I think you have to contrast your idea of controlled opposition with what you think is not controlled opposition. Because if we're screaming that everything is, well, show me an example of a non-controlled opposition movement. Like, play devil's advocate for a second. Give me a movement.
So I was thinking about this as I was exercising today before I came here. All opposition by its very nature is controlled, because it can't exist until something exists for it to oppose. So the thing that happens that generates somebody wanting to oppose it is literally controlling it.
So it's all controlled.
Opposition is controlled. Now, that doesn't mean it's all controlled in the way we normally think of it, like, oh, there's, you know, a think tank or a government or whatever.
You're saying it's an oxymoron word, right? Like it's a ridiculous. Yeah.
But it's like kind of like all news is. There's no such thing as news that's not fake. It's all fake. Right? Like there's no news that isn't, like, as soon as it becomes news, it's by definition fake, because you're no longer actually experiencing it. You're like talking about it, and if nothing else, then it's like
like the telephone effect, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And when you have if there's something to oppose, that thing is controlling that which it generates. The opposition wouldn't exist if the thing that is, you know, putting it into action didn't exist. I try
to think of like a smaller example, like two people having a conversation in whatever way that's not contrived. It's the contrived element. Like if I went to Andrea and I said, hey, let's have a conversation around 5 and talk about what we want to do tonight, that would be a controlled event, right? To some extent. Mm-hmm. If we're in here and she's listening to me have the show and she screams something across the room at me, that's like an organic event. That's something that was spontaneous, right? So in what group situations do you have that sort of organic level of spontaneity? And the answer is probably almost none. Like even in stores, people's movements through the stores are like herded in a certain direction, and you want to walk in a certain way, and the checkout thing is arranged in a certain way to like help traffic flow and whatnot, right? So what large group of people is not controlled to some extent? And if it's controlled, then, you know, who knows whether there's an agenda or not. And then since we all have hyperactive imaginations, then every time we're like, oh, the bad guys, because, you know, it's more fun to think of like a boogeyman hiding around every single corner than to think of because like I still didn't remember what I was trying to say, but one of the things with the convoy was, number one, it's like, it's just dudes driving trucks, like people that, it's like country boys or something like that. It's not like city slickers for the most part. They don't want to sit in a truck all day. It's good old country boys. And they don't get herded around that easily. That's the whole reason they're in the fucking truck in the first place, is so they can drive around by themselves, like in their own little bubble. They don't want to be bothered by shit. So why would they, each one of those people that decided to join the convoy, no one held a gun to their head. They decided of their own volition. So if it is controlled op and someone's like, get all these truckers together without them knowing about it, that's like really high level of skill. Not to mention, once you get that thing going, those are 10-ton trucks. That's not something, this idea of, oh, let's get the tow trucks to tow them. There aren't enough tow trucks to tow them if all the tow truck drivers didn't say, fuck you, we have COVID or whatever they did. It's the whole thing is impractical in terms of it being completely controlled. I don't think that's even possible.
Well, then the other thing you have in this scenario is obviously the weather, right? And people, if they don't actually feel something genuinely, are not generally willing to stand outside in that weather for the length of time that those people have been out there.
Yeah, and you got families making sandwiches, and you got people out there supporting them, and you got people out there like sort of guarding the situation for the crazy people that run and start screaming about how everyone should be wearing masks or vaccines or whatever, or we need to go to work. It's like they're trying to use the excuse, we need to go to work in the town of Ottawa, but yet nobody's been able to go to work because of this whole contrived COVID thing. So like the base level of logic is completely absent.
Well, then also, if this was sort of super controlled, you wouldn't have to necessarily have the prime minister hiding. And the other thing that leads me to believe that either A, this wasn't controlled, or B, if it was controlled, it fell apart, or it's piss poor control, is that they had to launch the Joe Rogan Spotify, Joe Rogan is now a racist op, right? At the exact same time that people were getting really fucking pissed off at GoFundMe. Right, and actually forced GoFundMe to, to do auto refund, right? So there was all this news about, the GoFundMe was seizing their money and they were going to give it to another charity, probably Black Lives Matter. But then suddenly we get this huge, like the Joe Rogan Spotify thing has been brewing for a couple of weeks, but it's been mostly over COVID misinformation. Then suddenly in the last 48 to 72 hours, it has switched to Joe Rogan is a racist and we're pulling 71 episodes where he says the N-word or something like that, right? And so literally there was almost no coverage of the fact that GoFundMe had to change what they were doing and auto refund the people's money, that there's like some crypto tally coin thing, and this is not a promotion of crypto or not a promotion of crypto, that is actually getting the money to them faster, and it's not this, the GoFundMe thing is not even a problem for them at this point. Right? They don't want anybody to know, right, what's really going on up there. Like, there's people that still haven't heard of this, right? But everybody at this point has heard that Joe Rogan is a racist. Everybody has something to say about Joe Rogan, but I'm 100% sure that nobody except for India RE, who managed to put together a video of 71 times Joe Rogan said the N-word, was like worried about Joe Rogan being a racist until the last 72 hours.
Yeah, I heard a good point on GoFundMe that anyone who donated should just go to their bank and file a chargeback and say services incorrectly delivered or not delivered. And then they'll have to pay like a service fee for every single person that does that.
They didn't want to have to do that, so they just auto refunded it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It's really like, if you don't mind, I want to share a video I found. Twitter video, a Twitio. Let's see.
Twitio?
Yeah.
All right, show your video, and then I want to hear what Birdie has to say about all this.
Okay.
Birdie comes from people familiar with occupation and psychological warfare and whatnot.
Can you give me a host or something or whatever?
Oh yeah, I gave you record share, but I gave you host. Let me give you host. Make co-host. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up my Twitter really quick here. This is a former board member guy of BlackRock.
Yep.
And these are his thoughts.
Make sure you share sound so that people can hear it.
Yeah, I will. There's like a separate share sound thing.
Yeah, so okay, stop your share for a second. Stop your share. And then push your share again. But before you go and push which frame you want to share, on the bottom left-hand corner, there's a place to hit share sound. And then everybody can hear as clearly as you hear it.
I got you. Should I optimize for video clip or no?
It doesn't matter. Just the sound is mostly probably what matters.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
You're more experienced in this arena.
Like one of the things that the guy who's the organizer of the convoy said is you don't even have to show your vaccine passport for them to know you're coming. Right? So think about a lot of these people who are out there in these protests, they are vaccinated. Then they have their cell phone with them. So they have their vaccine passport. Right. So they know exactly who's out there doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's more controlled in the sense of the AI overlords rather than human beings looking at everything. I think it's systematically controlled, and I think most of it is out of human beings' hands because human beings don't have the processing power to compute that many variables. Mm-hmm. That's my personal opinion. I don't think it's even possible. I think they have systems that calculate a bunch of variables and they spit out reports. They spit out like bullet points on what the overall situation looks like. But as far as the complexity of the multiple variable situation, which exponentially increases the amount of like data bits that have to be processed, that's not being handled at all by humans.
Bertie, what are your sort of thoughts and observations on what's been going on here?
What are my thoughts on the trucker convoy?
Just that, and like what we've been kind of talking about in terms of people being really, really quick to want to say, oh, this is completely controlled, or this is a completely fake movement, or just like what you think is actually going on here in terms of like what this is really all about. You know, I watch you, you do a lot of paying attention to and analyzing what's going on in the world as far as like the Russia-Ukraine situation and issues with China and Taiwan and whatnot. You know, and it looks a lot different, but this is in some ways that kind of thing too. So I'm curious to what your sort of analysis of all this stuff is.
I'm kind of on the same page as you guys to some degree, in the sense that I actually think it's mostly a genuine movement. Mm-hmm. But whenever there's mostly a genuine movement, something or some entity always steps in to attempt to control it or to attempt to direct it. Sooner or later, no matter how genuine a movement is, it becomes tainted to some degree, at least most of them. And I think this is no different. But if you ask me if I think like most of the people there are genuinely frustrated and annoyed and infuriated at the situation, I would definitely agree with that. I think 95% of them are there for real. We wouldn't be, I mean, I don't think they would do it. They wouldn't waste their time to do it and stand out there in the cold. However, on top of that, though, there are, I think the controllers, so to speak, are taking advantage of it as well, by seeing how far they can go in terms of like what you were talking about, GoFundMe.
Yeah.
So I've never heard of anything like that before. So I think that the whole robbing the 9 million GoFundMe is some sort of beta test for future movements like this that might arise, as like a warning to people. You fund these movements and we'll take all your money. Sort of, it's sort of a threat. So they are taking advantage of it in a threatening way. But yeah, again, there is some, like you said, there's genuine stuff to it. The president of Canada is peeing his pants and hiding somewhere, right? Or whatever. So, and then there's other elements to it too. I mean, it's multifaceted. I don't think it's one or two things. Then there's factions that are trying to distract people from the war machine that's building up. They think that this is great for them. And Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan thing, I think is totally, that I do think is controlled completely.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is actually even, what's his name? Russell Brand made a video. He even said in his video that he thinks it's a distraction from, the looming war they're preparing. And it is. It's a good distraction.
So
Joe Rogan.
what you said about the, one of the things about Americans, and I can't speak to Canadians, right? But there is some crossover between, even though this thing is happening in Canada, Americans are paying attention to it. Some of them are up there at the border of Montana and whatever. And apparently there's something like that trying to happen here or whatever. But Westerners, people from Western countries, England, United States, Canada, to a certain extent, Australia, they're very easy to distract with like domestic issues that they feel affect them, and it keeps them from paying attention to what their government is doing around the world elsewhere, right? And, I don't know if you guys know Melissa and Aaron Dykes are from Truth Stream Media. Like they were some of the defectors from Alex Jones at a certain point. They do great work. But Melissa at one point went back and actually checked and figured it out and drew up a graph and stuff that every time there was a school shooting that earlier that day, the United States had taken an illegal war action in another country. So that there would be none of that reported on the news, or if it was buried on page 30, they would concoct there was never a single time when that wasn't the case.
Wow.
Right? So now we don't go to school anymore, so there's no school shootings. So now it's, something like this. It's a Joe Rogan or it's a trucker thing or whatever. But, to your point in some of your interesting posts and stuff, Bertie, like this is not cute what's going on with China and Taiwan, what's going on with, Russia and Ukraine. Never mind all of the other illegal actions our country's involved in the Middle East and in Africa and whatever. But those two are at a brink that we haven't been to in a long time. And we're talking about how all of our oceans are full of warships that nobody's paying attention to. They're more concerned with, the cargo ships off the port of Long Beach because they can't get their goods from Amazon, right? or not, right? So.
Somebody should check and see if there were like the same sort of illegal war actions that took place during the same exact time Joe Rogan thing was going down.
I do know that there was some drone bombing somewhere in the Middle East that killed a bunch of innocent people. I'm not sure if it was the U.S. though. It was a couple of weeks ago though. It wasn't right now. I'm pretty sure it was a U.S. drone, but I know a bunch of innocent people died. So
think about this. Like it used to be, whenever there was something like this, there would be a school shooting. We'd have all this faux outrage. Well, I mean, some of it's not faux, but like, they're going to take the guns away. The left would be trying to pass bills to take the guns away, and the right would be then busy trying to fundraise and pass bills to not take the gun rights away, and there'd be all this noise about that, right? So think about what's going on here. If every time there's something going on geopolitically, they have a new release of papers from Pfizer that seem to, admit what we've all suspected is going on, and then you have people getting up in arms over that, or some Robert Malone or Peter McCullough is saying something that is not controversial, but everyone likes to pretend it is on there, and everyone's up in arms over that, or someone says the N-word, or someone isn't nice to transgender people, and there's bills. And I don't think Joe Rogan has had a single guest on talking about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, have they? I don't think so.
I don't listen to Joe Rogan.
Well, the thing is the U.S. is being caught with their pants down. Have you heard that they're blaming Russia? That they're trying to say that Russia's going to start a false flag operation. Have you heard about that?
Right. Did you guys see Matt Lee, the reporter Matt Lee, questioning the guy from the State Department, Ned Price, the other day? Did you catch that?
Yeah, that was the most embarrassing interview I've ever seen in my life, honestly.
Did you see it, Gary?
I haven't seen it. Do you have it?
So, Ned Price, who's the State Department spokesperson, says that there's been recently declassified information that Russia is preparing a false flag in order to justify going to war with Ukraine. And Matt Lee is like, great, let's see the evidence of that, right? And then Price is like, that's the evidence. What's the evidence? That I just told you. That's the evidence, right? So it basically, like, so Matt Lee went everywhere. He he went in circles with him about that for a few minutes, but he also was like, well, wait a second. Alex Jones says there's such thing as a false flag. There isn't, but now there is. Are you saying there's crisis actors too? He pulled out all the stops, right? I just kept looking down and saying, this is the classified evidence. And he's like, what's the evidence? The evidence is that Russia is preparing a false flag. There's no video, there's no document, there's no recording, there's no SIGOP intelligence or anything like that. It's just that we're saying that that's what they're doing, which actually, if you really want to dig into this, Alex Jones offered much more evidence for every false flag that he ever declared existed than, you know what I mean? Like, it was in Looney Tunes territory.
Wait, so the government itself is attempting to like play the conspiracy theorist role now? Is that what's happening?
Yes. Russia,
you made a good point. Yeah.
Russia is making videos with crisis actors. Like they said, Russia is preparing a false flag. It might come in the form of a video. So think about the things that people have said about, I'm not going to say the name because then we'll get, booted off or whatever. But a certain event that happened, right, that like there was videos of people laughing and doing things that wouldn't be normal if this was an actual occurrence kind of thing, right? So literally taking and the guy called him out on it. It's like, are we talking about crisis actors here? Like, what are we talking about, Alex Jones? Like, it was really good.
Well, because previous is the previous stance for governments that type of thing just does not exist in any way, shape, or form, or is it that the other country does it but we don't ever do it? Like, what is the stance on psyops?
So I think they try not to talk about it, right? Like they try not to talk about it at all, which is like weird. But this isn't the first time recently we've veered into that territory, right? We have the government saying that the Havana syndrome is caused by psychotronic weaponry. But just a few years ago, you have someone who, like the kid at the Navy Yard shooting, was saying that he was the subject of psychotronic weaponry, and they're like, he's crazy. Mm-hmm. Well, why was he crazy 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, or however long it was ago? But now you're saying it, right? So they seem to have like run out of plausible explanations for things that are to cover their actions, and now the only place left for them to go is into the scripts that we in the alternative media have written for them with our deep, detailed analysis. Like I've told Sophia so many times, stop it, Sophia Smallstorm. I'm like, stop doing this, because like sometimes you're just analyzing what they've done, but you take it a step farther and you're giving them ideas they haven't thought about yet. So you have to stop it, right?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I know that whole idea of like the stealing of dreams, basically, like stealing of imagination and possibilities. I know that exists.
Well, think about it. They have at their, like, the government, let's just pretend that, like, money is what they say it is. And if we're in as much debt as your friend on the Twitter video said, they've run out of money for intelligence operations and think tanks and all of this kind of stuff. But they have this thing called YouTube and Facebook and whatnot, where people like us will sit around all day and opine and play what if about what they're doing. And probably like half of the time we're analyzing things they're actually doing, but the other half we're like analyzing things that they haven't thought of yet. So we're literally writing the script for that.
They're like, oh, let's write that one down.
That's a good one, dude. Right?
Yeah.
So that, right? And the way all of these things are happening, we haven't had a moment where there in a long time, but really like since the beginning of the year, where there hasn't been some absolutely ridiculous, out of proportion story going on that was sucking air out of the room. Right? Of course, we started the year with, and I'm not doing this to exhaust people, but the Novak Djokovic situation in Australia was ridiculous, right? Like the whole world was paying attention to like a tennis player being holed up in a hotel with migrants and detainees and whatever. And there's, it became people, I talk about tennis all the time. I like tennis. People who've always been like annoyed at the fact that I talked about tennis and probably still are again now, like they were wanting to know all about it and, whatever kind of thing. Think about this Joe Rogan thing, right? Joe Rogan is to podcasting and comedy sort of similar to, Djokovic to tennis. And these are the things we're captivated with, while NATO and the Russian military are right up against each other, while there's warships off of Taiwan, while there's all this other stuff going on, we're focused on like athletes and comedians and what they have to say about politics. That's when you know you're at the end of the road.
Yeah, and when racism is actually like a debatable topic, whether or not somebody's a racist. Like I'm still in disbelief that has ever been a thing to at all. It's a dumb topic.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bertie.
Can I add to that what you just said about the war? You see, the thing is that a lot of things that happened over the last few years, like, really desensitized people to the possibility of a third world war. Because I don't know if you remember, in the beginning of 2020, there was a huge hashtag going around, World War III, after Soleimani was killed in Iran. Mm-hmm. So I think that was 100% a psyop and a total operation to get people ramped up and afraid, and then just suddenly and abruptly dwindle it down into a nothing situation. And then years later, have the real thing just blow up completely out of nowhere, out of the blue, which I think is...
I think that's been the entire purpose, largely, of the truth movement, right? Like, exhaust us with so many times saying the system is about to collapse or the government is going to put you in camps, and have it not happen, that by the time the thing actually happens, we're all so fucking jaded, we're like, completely asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's how I see it, too. It's a mental and spiritual exhaustion.
Yeah.
And this whole, the disease psyop was the biggest part of that, probably.
Totally, yeah.
I have some interesting thought about the convoy that you may or may not appreciate. And I don't know if it's valid or not, but I have a sub called Johnny Octane. His name is Lee, I think, but he goes by Johnny or Lee. But I was asking him directly via Messenger if he himself went to the convoy and why or why not. And he said, no, I didn't go to the convoy because if I had tried to go to the convoy, then my company would have seen I had diverted from course and they would have shut my truck down as soon as I was 10 miles outside of range. So I was trying to understand what he meant by that. And he said, I'm not an owner-operator, I'm just an employee. So I just looked up what the percentage of truckers are that are also owner-operators, which means they kind of get to play their own hand rather than listen to their boss. And it says 9%.
9% or 90?
9%.
9%, okay.
So if that stat is correct, and for the most part, employee truckers are going to get their trucks shut down if they move outside of their prescribed route, that means the pool to choose from has to be within the 9%. So possibly you could look into the number of truckers, which is, I think, estimated like, 50 to 70,000 or something like that, and see if that even matches up. I think it said in Canada there's like 350,000 truckers. So 9% of that is already only like 27,000. Which would be outside of the realm of possibility, given what I just said, unless there are companies on board with the whole thing in the first place, allowing their employees to go.
Yeah, no, I do think that is the case in some places, because you've heard like the government tried to call towing agencies to come tow some of these trucks and not, and some of these companies didn't want to because they have contracts, and nobody's usually worried about losing a contract with a single truck. But if there's a company that has 10, 20, 40, 500 trucks or whatever, they don't want to lose that contract.
Yeah.
Right?
You mean it in terms of if the truckers themselves are contracted to the towing company?
So, like, I think what happens is these tow truck companies have contracts in areas where some of these companies are headquartered, right? So if it's just a single person's truck, that's not going to affect your business relationship with the business community and the town that you do business in. But let's say that, like, I'm just going to come up, like, let's think of, like, fucking Penske moving trucks, right? Like, let's say Penske has a place where they park, like that they disperse their trucks out of, that's in Edmonton, Alberta, right? And the Penske Penske supports this, and then they bring, you know, the tow trucks from Edmonton come and start towing these people's trucks out of the way. That's going to affect their ability to get contracts in the town, because a lot of people in the town work for Penske or maybe are part, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's more complicated. They haven't been able to get people to be willing to turn against. And I don't think it's just because people have suddenly become super moral and they're like, no, I'm not doing that. It's because they're concerned about their relationships with these people, with these companies, with businesses. I'm sure that the bulk of the truckers are individual owner-operator ones, but my guess would be that there is a percentage of companies that either are on board, maybe not on board, but are afraid to oppose it based on where they're located and who their customers are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So it's all of those things. It's like whenever you have, you know, a dynamic where there's a company that is, you know, important to a town, right? Then everything's manipulatable on both sides, both in terms of the people who are the customers or the providers for that. Everyone's afraid to make a move that the company or the people who live in the town where the company is aren't going to like.
Right.
So, anywho, all right. So let's step away from the convoy for a second and go to another one of these sort of weird kind. You know, Australia is pretty similar to Canada in a lot of ways. Obviously, it's different because it's isolated. You know, and it's in a completely different kind of location and climate. But its relationship to England and to, you know, whatnot is a very similar kind of. You know, it's part of the Five Eyes, right? Type of countries, and you know, it's part of the West, even though it's down, you know, in the global far south and whatnot. It's considered a Western democracy, right, or whatnot. And we've been seeing no place really more tyrannical than those two places, other than like maybe Israel and Austria.
New Zealand is pretty bad, I hear. Yeah,
for the last 2 years. You know what's weird? I looked up the most libertarian country the other day, and New Zealand was number one. I'm like, what? But Australia and Canada are quite similar, right? You think of the people as nice and they're obedient and they do what they told and, you know, whatever it is kind of thing. So we've been watching complete tyranny there. And you had an interesting realization about Australia that I'd like to hear you tell the people about a little bit. And then I have some things that I noticed that I'll pop in with.
Yeah. I just remembered. Well, I was thinking about how dictatorial Australia was becoming and trying to figure out why. And I was just playing, like, I was thinking about gematria and playing with the word itself, and I came up with astral U plus astral and then AI at the end. So I was like, you and AI or Professor AI in the astral. And it's like a sort of analogy to, I think, the energetic situation there being really thin. And also, I don't know if you remember her name, but the what's-her-face from Australia, the popular chick, said hell is directly underneath it. She said, like, energetically speaking, the pit is directly underneath Australia. Which would, if sort of energetically true, would account for it being a highly dictatorial area, right?
That's why it's called the land down under.
Right. So you also, I think part of why you started talking about it was because you weren't aware that Australia was referred to or is considered to be in the part of the world known as Oceania before. You'd never heard of this, right? Like, what was this?
It was a Mandela effect for me. I've never heard of any Oceania, like I said in the post, outside of that book 1984.
Right.
And I didn't even do the research, but are like the other two, like I think it was Eurasia and what was the third one? Oceania, Eurasia, and I forget the last one. But it would be interesting if the other two fictional, like, socialist regimes in 1984 are actually in this realm as well. That would be really fascinating.
Bertie, were you aware that part of the world, was that a Mandela effect for you too, or did you know about Oceania?
Not for me. I've always known about that. Sorry, Gary, it looks like we're from different roots.
It's probably just I'm ignorant of it. That's actually more likely. I don't get Mandela affected that often.
So me too, and I'm not. You just never heard of it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's something I've heard of a lot. It's not like, oh yeah, Oceania, right? Like, it wasn't like that. I have happened to have heard of it though, and of course it was in 1984. I don't believe that's where, I think I heard about it when we were studying like the globe or maps when I was in elementary school.
No.
But I also remember my sister, like, for some reason when you brought this up, so you're gonna like where I go with this. This is fun, right? So when my sister was little, like for some reason, my sister would do stuff like this, but for like a week, she was like insisting that we call her Oceania, right? My sister's name is Kara, right?
Okay.
But she stuff like that, right? And so I was thinking about that, and then I remembered that there's a tennis player whose name is I think it's Oceana, not Oceania, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oceania.
Oh, wow.
But she's not a top tennis player. She plays doubles, and she's always around in like the first and second rounds of tournaments, right? But I haven't even seen her in a long time. I didn't know if maybe she retired or not, right? And her name is Oceana Dodan, okay? So I went and looked up to see if she played in Australia, and this is what I found, and you're gonna fucking love this, all right? Check this out. So her name is Oceana Dodan, right? So Oceania, right? DODN. So the DOD was in Oceania. There was a missile hit Tonga, right? There was a missile that hit Tonga that they said was a volcano during that period of time. You know what I'm talking about?
Wait, so the Department of Defense is in Oceania? Is that what you're saying?
Oceania, right? And I'm sitting there, look at the girl who beat her. I beg you. I beg you to write Oceania DODN, and you have the explosion. Michael and I covered, the Tongan explosion.
God.
And how there was this weird thing going on on Tasmania. They put this big black box in that was supposed to record if like the apocalypse happened that same week or whatever, right? So like whatever the fuck this is, wouldn't it be hilarious? Because this was happening, right? This was happening. Remember, Djokovic is in the hotel, and there's the controversy because there's another girl who's an unknown a doubles player who had gotten in without being vaccinated too, and they deported her also, right? So she's more the kind of player like this chick, right? Like just not super well known, doesn't make a lot of money doing this, like a journeyman kind of player. Mm-hmm. So if all of the fucking attention being paid to Djokovic and the fucking hotel and all the shit that's going on there was to cover up the fact that the DOD was in the ocean there in fucking Tonga, right? Doing a fucking ball. I mean, I'm not saying that that's what it is, but we're playing to code the words around Australia, right?
Yeah.
You also mentioned in your video, and also we have Novak Djokovic, right? Like, he has no vaccine. This is a fucking joke. He's a joker, right? Like, all that. Novak Djokovic, that's the joke. And Ocean Dodan, right, is like what the real code is. I beg you. I beg you to fucking find this one, right? So, but during the background of all this, you talked about in your video about how Australia is kind of a vortex, right? So, if you remember back couple years ago, right before all this crazy shit started, there was those fires in Australia. There was those the bushfires. Well, that happened during the Australian Open, and it was like really weird. Like that tournament, everybody was wearing these like animal print tennis outfits and stuff like that. And there's this huge fire going on, which of course like Novak Djokovic donated to. And there was, but the fires kind of started the ritual about whatever's been going on down there. So you seem to have this controversy every time at this time of the year, something's going on down there, right? But Melbourne is a weird place. Well, we watched for Conspiracy Cocktail this like sort of independent movie that was kind of documentary-ish or whatnot, but it was about these people that spend all of their time obsessively looking for the doorway to the other reality that exists somewhere in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Right. So we watched this. Somebody brought my attention to this during this time. And what's fascinating is so many of the things from the movie are actually things that like, have come up in Michael and I's work, what we're doing on our own with the glass bead game and stuff like that. But it all has to do with like buildings and angles of light and perception, that there's literally some sort of like entrance way to the other space. So to your point, as like, is there a digital realm of hell? Is there a vortex? Why are they so focused? Why is there so much tyranny there? Why is it so important that people that don't have an electronic tag on them not be able to move freely? Is there like a door to somewhere else? And is that place a good place or a bad place? I don't know if that matters, right? But you were kind of tracking all of these things through your little realization with that. And meanwhile, in the background, I was doing all of these other things, and I thought the overlap was kind of synchronistic. So
yeah. It's. I've never been to Australia, so the only thing I know about it is the accent. I can recognize the accent, but in terms of how life actually is there. The only thing I would note is that it is like a Jekyll and Hyde type thing, because before they turned tyrannical, they were like, "Oh, we're playing with kangaroos and it's sunny and beaches and
the land of wonder. Put a shrimp on the Barbie, right? Like they called the Australian Open the Happy Slam. Really? Right? Think about what people say about Canadians too. Oh, they're so nice. Canadians are what? Like they just do what they're told and they're obedient and blah 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 blah. Right?
And even, that's funny because even the Icelandic, like Norway, Finland, Sweden, they have the same reputation. I think Norway had the reputation of being like the happiest country on earth. It was one of those three. And they seem to be pretty tyrannical as compared to the rest of them. So it seems like all of the regions are playing a polarity flip. Like, maybe that's the pole change, is just the pole shift. The countries just flip in terms of how they actually present.
And the other thing, remember this whole thing that was going on just a few months ago when I say here about Ocean, DODN, remember the whole controversy about Australia and the nuclear agreement, and how there was like some rumble between the United States and France based on who was going to arm Australia with nuclear weapons? I'm pretty sure that happened just a few months ago. Am I making that up, or is that real?
No, that was either in October or November. The U.S. sold Australia nuclear submarines.
Yep, and so that's
right away. While France was planning on, they already made a contract with France, but they had to wait like 10 more years.
Right.
But for some reason, the U.S. just instantly sold them these nuclear submarines.
All right, so that was from September. So there we have the DOD in the ocean, right? The U.S. selling them nuclear submarines, basically, right? I'm going out on the edge there of that. But of course, Ocean Dodin is from France. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure that's what the case. Yeah, look, Ocean Dodin, that's the French flag.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
All right, so
real.
That lends more to the sim theory, because like otherwise, how could all this stuff be planned? How could the Simpsons be predicting everything? How could the Illuminati card deck predict things? If it's a sim, that means someone can type in, okay, this tennis player is going to name I beg you. This tennis player is going to be named Ocean Dodin, and then that's what their name is.
Novak Djokovic,
right? Djokovic, right? Like, in a real reality, in an organic reality, where the parents themselves came up with the names because of whatever they had their reasons, it wouldn't be a CIA operation, right? So that gives a lot more credence to the possibility that it is just a sim.
There's so many things that, it's what's funny is so many people who are so conspiratorial in their thinking also reject the idea of a simulation, even though a simulation would validate everything they believe to be true. Yeah. Like, there's something about it they're very offended by. The other thing going on, because I've been tracking, you guys both do a lot of community posts on YouTube, and I don't always have time to watch a lot of videos anymore. So
I do way too many. I'm going to slow down.
But it's great. I can read your tea leaves by doing that, right? I can just check that. I know what's going on. So I've been tracking your Mr. Wolf thing, right? Okay, so one of the things that's come up, again, with this Australian thing, like Novak Djokovic has talking about how he relates to wolf energy, right? And there's these Serbian wolf people that Michael and I have talked about in the show, and my friend Eric has covered in his show, right? And the Serbian Special Forces, I just found out, they call themselves the Wolves, right? And during this same period of time, when they're saying Novak Djokovic is not going to be able to play in France at the next slam, or he's not going to be able to play if he's not vaccinated, Mr. Wolf disappears from. Because Daniel's the Mandela effect monster over here, right? Mr. Wolf disappears from Pulp Fiction, and when I'm reading your community post, the restaurant I'm sitting at while I'm reading it, one of the songs from the Pulp Fiction soundtrack came on at the moment I was reading your thing where you're talking about it. So there's some layering that's going on, because I'm with multiple people. Tell us a little bit about the Mr. Wolf Pulp Fiction Mandela effect, because that's a new one.
Well, if I'm going to talk about that, I don't know if it's new, to be honest, because I did post it on Reddit, and somebody did say that they've known about this Mandela effect for 6 months now, so I can't claim it's entirely new. But I got to talk about my dad, and calling him about it. The reason is because that's his favorite movie. He quoted that movie my entire life. Like, I can't even tell you how many times. That's his favorite scene, too. So I told him about it. I'm like, the car pulls up, his Acura NSX, and it pulls up, and there's this really obnoxiously close, like, zoom, close-up shot of the license plate. Like, they specifically put the camera as low as possible to get the license plate, and it's just a generic plate. But it was never a generic plate. It used to say Mr. Wolf on it. And speaking of which, on Reddit, I did find a bunch of residue in like comedy skits and stuff like that. So it no longer says Mr. Wolf. And Mr. Wolf in the movie was the guy that comes in and solves problems when they went to Quentin Tarantino's garage when they had to take care of the dead body. So that was Harvey Keitel's character, basically.
What did your dad say?
No, he was shocked. I told him about two. He was more shocked about the Soviet flag, but he was still shocked about that as well. He said that he's going to look. He has like an original copy, and he said he's going to look into it. But yeah, he said that he remembers it saying Mr. Wolf. And I've probably seen the movie, I don't know, 10 times. It's a tiny detail, but it's one of those things that you don't forget because of that close-up shot and how in your face it is. And again, it to me and to people that are familiar with this stuff, it makes no sense to make a close-up shot of a generic license plate. It just, in film, that makes no sense to do that unless there's like something special or something that they wanted to show the audience in that plate, which used to be Mr. Wolf, right?
Dan, so, can you share what residuals means with regard?
Residuals. So like evidence. So like, for example, people making, like, for example, there was a picture of a guy that had an Acura NSX, and he put on his license plate Mr. Wolf. It was just some regular guy who was a fan of the movie.
So like reflections of the movie in so-called real life? Okay.
Like memories of it. Like it must have happened because people have all these souvenirs of it, even though the original.
Yeah, I got you.
Like, there's a bunch of Mandela effects that have tons of like residual like stuff from SNL skits, from things of that nature, where you could find people saying stuff that technically never existed, right? Because they're misremembering something that never existed, which makes no sense. But that's what mainstream science wants to tell us.
So it's interesting that this one really brought something up for your dad, because I don't know if you remember, but in that last show you and I did together, one of the last things we talked about was that like Italian bombing that like this didn't exist. And when we got off, the last thing I said is, I'm going to go ask my dad. And my dad does not remember that. So
I remember. Yeah, you told me. Yes.
So my dad is thick and dense and thinks he's definitely humored by me, right? But my dad is not like, he's not super he's just not, usually he's just like, oh, there's some plausible explanation. He has no memory. My dad was a political science teacher, so like that's the kind of thing that he would know about and somewhat of a history, right? Oh yeah,
that's exactly the type of thing. Wow,
right, so he didn't remember that. There's no one, like everybody that we asked, like, so that's, so I'm wondering, these things with our parents are fascinating. Like, does this mean like at least like our parents are kind of real, right? Like that, so at least with some of us, because they're so NPC'd in like their political viewpoints, the shit with the COVID, even in my dad's case, he does think everyone's fucking racist and all that kind of shit, but he was not willing to say something existed that he didn't remember existing. Right. And so in some ways, and it's like feels and sounds so stupid, but like with some of those people who like, our parents are of the age that like nostalgia and memory is important to them. Young kids don't care about that shit because there's something new and exciting every minute. Nostalgia and like tasting things from like when they were a kid, like going to the ice cream, parlor that they went to when they were a kid, or the place they used to go for whatever, like it brings back memories. And what's funny is it's called the Mandela effect. I always want to call it the Mandala Mandala effect, right? But one of the things that's been the most important to my dad is like the racial situation in Africa. He studied in South Africa. So did my sister, right? And so we have this thing called the Mandela effect that doesn't really explain the phenomenon at all. But if you called it the Mandala effect, it wouldn't imply anything people would connect with race, and therefore it's a psyop and divisible. And what you said earlier, Gary, is like, why does anybody even talk about this? What a Mandala is like a very spiritual, it's like a design that contains every iteration of everything within it. It's kind of like a fractal and a natural floral geometry thing. And it sort of has, you can find evidence of it from every spiritual system that's ever existed, right? Yeah. So it would take the phenomena out of something that is like just novelty and like about remembering details and therefore triggering how you feel about that person, that place, or that thing, into something that is a spiritual phenomenon that is related to like awakening in the grander sense. So I think they could even have possibly intentionally misnamed it the Mandela. Who came up with that term?
Yeah.
Mandela effect. Mandala effect actually describes what it is. Like most of the mandalas have like, they're very floral looking. And if you look in each like section of the mandala, it's almost exactly like the one next to it, but slightly different, but slightly different, but slightly different. Mm-hmm. It is literally the shape and design that describes the phenomenon perfectly.
Yeah, maybe we should start calling it that. Emily, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Are we doing 2 shows, 2 segments, or is this a run on like 2 hour?
Let's stop it right now. Yeah, I was just going to say, let's round it out there, and then let's I want to go over and talk about gematria, the good, the bad, the ugly, the decodable, and the undecodable for a little bit. So, or we can just keep going. Do you want to do it like this, or do you want to?
I gotta be out by around 3:45, so right. I don't.
Let's do this. Let's stop it right here, guys. If you want to go catch the second segment of this, which is going to be on gematria, you can go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia, patreon.com/snail show, or emilymoyer.locals.com. I'm going to stop this, and we'll be right back with that side in just a second.
Recording stopped.
All right, here we go.
I need a little break.
Recording in progress.
Recording stopped.
Yep.
Okay. Friday break.